It's like only halfway in the screen.
I know. It's a shame because it's like the best piece of art in this whole house.
Maybe I'll put a picture of it right here. Look at this peacock Marissa made. If you want to see it, watch us on YouTube. If you're not watching,
you can see the bottom half. You can see the tail and down.
But I'm putting it up right here. It's in my hands.
Yeah, I painted that. So I guess you could say I'm an artiste.
Let's get to the episode.
Okay. Hello and welcome back to the Conspiracy Couple podcast. I'm Marissa.
And I'm Ethan.
And today we have another very interesting topic to discuss with you guys. But before we get started, I'm going to throw it over to Ethan.
Yeah, okay. I didn't know that's how you're doing it.
I just kind of did it.
You should follow us on all social media. Conspiracy Couple on Instagram, Conspiracy Couple Podcast on TikTok. And if you're not currently watching us on YouTube, go on over there and subscribe at Conspiracy Couple Podcast. And if you are watching us on YouTube, take some time to go ahead and subscribe, turn on post notifications, like the video, and leave a comment.
Yes, thank you for that, Ethan. Thank you for rolling with the punches there.
Yeah, that's what I do.
And if you're listening, make sure you give us a nice 5-star review on your streaming platform of choice. We really love to see those and love hearing what you guys enjoy about the podcast. We don't have anything to discuss before we dive in?
No.
Okay. So this week on the podcast, we are going to be discussing the Circleville Letters. So... Circleville, yes. Good job, Ethan. So this was actually a topic that was requested by one of our friends and listeners, Bethany. So Bethany, thank you so much for suggesting this topic because it's super, super interesting and I think you guys are going to like it and like hearing it as much as I liked researching it. So Ethan, as always, do you know anything about the Circleville Letters?
Yeah, I've never heard of them.
Okay, that gives us a good place to start.
Yeah, I'm coming in fresh.
And just a quick note, if you guys have any topics or anything that you want us to discuss, just let us know. Put a comment down below in the YouTube comment section. Send us a DM on Instagram. And just let us know if you guys have something that you'd love to want us to hear us talk about, because most of the time what you guys are interested in, I'm also interested in. And so yeah, it's really interesting. So the Circleville Letters are one of the biggest enduring mysteries that began in a small town called Circleville, Ohio.
Ohio?
Yes, and basically what happened is that mysterious letters were sent from an anonymous writer to various residents in the town. And to this day, the author of the letters has not been identified.
What year?
So the residents of the town began receiving letters in 1976. And so the contents of the letters were very personal. They revealed very personal information about the residents, a lot of times talking about their sex lives, accusing them of serious crimes, as well as accusing them of more taboo things. So some of the topics discussed in the letters involved extramarital affairs, embezzlement, domestic violence.
Not great.
And even murder.
None of those are good.
Right. And these letters weren't just stating that they knew about these things, but they would threaten the recipient of the letters and would have these kind of violent and menacing undertones, stating that they had been watching them and that there would be consequences if they didn't do what they said.
So these are kind of like blackmail letters a little bit.
Kind of like blackmail letters, okay. Yeah. So something that I've seen it be described as, and kind of something that kind of stuck in my head, was like, this is very Gossip Girl. Although just instead of like text messages, they were letters, obviously, because it's the 70s. But like, if you ever watched Gossip Girl, which if you haven't, you need to. It's one of the best shows in the world. It's my favorite show. Basically, like, there's Gossip Girl, who's this anonymous source who like will text out these alerts with like the secrets of the people on the Upper West Side. And so think about that, although they don't figure out who Gossip Girl is at the end of season 6, and it's not a text, it's a letter, and it's all anonymous. So Gossip Girl, but in letters.
I feel like anyone who already knows what Gossip Girl is already knew all that info, and if they didn't know Gossip Girl, I don't know how helpful that would be.
They need to watch Gossip Girl. Anyways, so the town of
Thank you for that analogy.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So the town of Circleville, Ohio was a very small town, and it had a population of about 12,000 people at the time of the letters. And it was a town where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business, which is interesting because these letters are like, oh, we have these secrets, but some of the secrets everyone kind of already knew about.
Right. In a town like that, those kind of secrets usually travel around.
They travel around. Yes. They stay secret in as much as people talk about it behind your back, but everyone knows about it.
Right.
So the town is very rural, and everyone described it as a really good place to live, a really good place to like raise children, until the events that we will discuss. So the main claim to fame of the area before the Circleville Letters was its annual pumpkin festival. Yeah. So it went from the annual pumpkin festival to the Circleville Letters. So kind of a shift.
A little bit.
Yeah. So the terror of the letters spanned 18 years in total.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, I didn't realize how long it was. I thought it was just a handful.
Is it confirmed that the letters all came from the same person?
We are going to get into that. Okay. Yes and no. So no, because they don't know who the person is.
Right, it's hard to identify.
They can't conclusively say
but
yes.
They believe it's the same handwriting.
They believe it is the same handwriting, and they believe that it all came from one person.
Okay, keep going. Sorry.
So 18 years and hundreds of letters were sent. So all of the letters were written in this big block letters, which was probably an attempt to conceal the author's handwriting.
Okay.
So that's just like the most basic background. And most of our episode is going to center around one of the first people to receive the letters. And this is a person who had a lot of drama that followed as a result of the letters. And so our story is really going to center around a woman named Mary Gillespie. So Mary was a school bus driver in the area, and she was married to her high school sweetheart, and his name was Ron. And they had 2 children together. So one day, Mary receives a letter from a mysterious author. And in the letter, she was accused of having an extramarital affair with the superintendent of one of the schools in the area, a man named Gordon Massey. So Gordon Massey was, along with being the superintendent, he was a pretty well-respected person in the community, and he was known to have a good reputation. So many of the letters that would come would be fixated on Massey and Mary and their supposed relationship.
A lot of the, following letters?
Yes.
Okay.
So the letters were postmarked from Columbus, Ohio, and it had no return address, and it had no indication of who had written the letter. So Mary gets the first letter, and 8 days later, she receives the second letter.
Oh, she received another letter.
She received another letter, yes. So at the time, Mary denied that she was having an affair with Gordon, and initially she kept the letters hidden from her husband and didn't tell anyone about it because she didn't want to stress anyone out, and she also didn't want to bring this information to her husband when she says that she's not having an affair.
I'm guessing she did.
And we'll get into it.
Okay.
So the author of the letters warned Mary that they were watching her home, and her children, and told her that she needed to stop the affair.
Oh.
A quote from one of the letters said, "Stay away from Massey. Don't lie when questioned about knowing him. I know where you live. I've been observing your house and know you have children. This is no joke. Please take it serious. Everyone concerned has been notified, and everything will be over soon."
So they weren't asking for money. They were just telling her to stop.
Yep, they were telling her to stop.
Interesting.
Yes. So the author also threatened her daughters, stating that he would shoot the daughter if this wasn't resolved and exposed. So not only did the author want her to stop the affair, the author wanted her to go to the school board and tell them about the affair.
Okay.
So there was this idea of exposing this secret.
Yeah.
I want this secret to come to light, and I want it to also be done. So Mary gets these letters, and she's keeping them a secret. However, shortly after this, her husband Ron received a letter from the same author, saying that if Mary didn't stop her affair, her life would be in danger. He got another letter later saying that if Ron himself did not tell the school board about the affair, the author would kill Ron.
Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm. So the author also said that Ron should catch the two of them together and kill both of them for the affair.
Okay, this person does not like affairs, it seems.
Yes, it seems this person has some pretty
strong feelings about
extramarital affairs and about the sanctity of marriage. Not so much the sanctity of life.
Right.
Yeah, they're like, marriage, cheating, that's one thing that I cannot tolerate. Murder, I'm okay with that.
It makes you think, potentially, I'm not trying to get ahead of myself, but it makes you think that maybe the writer could be somebody who is affected by this, has a personal connection to it. Why else would you feel so passionate about it? I think oftentimes when we see like affairs or different things like that, like we're all like, oh, that's so bad. Like, how could you do that? But we're never like, oh my gosh.
At least I hope we are.
Right. You should be.
Yeah.
But most people, if they're not personally affected by it, are not like, oh, they deserve to die. Like they deserve this. They're just like, that sucks.
Yeah.
Like, if you're personally affected by it or something, maybe you could get to that point where you're like, want them to die.
If you're someone who, like, has experienced what affairs do to families.
That's true. So, they're, okay.
Because, like, I've seen people who, like, when they have a family member who, like, has an affair and they see what it does to the family, then they get they get, like, more likely to be angry about this kind of thing.
Makes sense.
So... in the letters to Ron, the author said that he knew where he worked and described his truck in detail. So, Mary denied that she was having an affair with Massey. She's like...
to her husband?
To everyone. Mary denied that she was having an affair. So, one of the letters to Ron says, Gillespie, you have had 2 weeks and done nothing. Make her admit the truth and inform the school board. If not, I will broadcast it on the CBs, posters, signs, and billboards until the truth comes out.
What are CBs?
Yeah, so CBs are the radio systems that the bus drivers would use.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't know what those were until I watched, I think it was the 48 Hours episode about it. But yeah, so like the bus drivers would communicate on CBs.
Okay. CB radios.
So after this, Ron's getting these letters, and signs start going up around the town. And the signs go up around the town accusing Mary and Gordon of having an affair, and even accusing Gordon and Mary's 12-year-old daughter of having some kind of a relationship.
Okay, that's real bad.
Yeah. So the way that I described it was that I heard it described was that Gordon and the daughter were having an affair, but I'm like, well, she's 12.
Yeah, that's
not an affair.
More than an affair.
Yeah.
That's
a
lot worse.
Yeah.
It's a crime.
That's not an affair. But anyways, so Ron would leave his house early every single morning to go tear down the signs and drive around town and look for signs.
So he like believed his wife that this wasn't true.
That's what it seems like, that he believes his wife.
Right. Or he's just trying to cover it up.
Or I mean,
but why would
regardless, I mean, let's just play devil's advocate. Let's just say he doesn't believe his wife. Mary's saying, I'm not having an affair, and he doesn't believe her. Regardless, you have to also think that, he has children with her.
Right, it's true.
So if he comes out and says, yeah, Mary's cheating on me, and this letter person is right, well then, one, that could make them think that maybe other things were correct as well.
Right.
And then it could also, affect his daughters. And so he has to think, I don't want my kids to be publicly humiliated like this in town.
It's true.
So I think regardless, I think there's a lot of motivations here about why he would be tearing down the signs.
Yeah.
So, surprise, surprise, Gordon Massey also received letters from this mysterious author, with one of them saying, Dear Sir, according to my GF, you have asked her to go out many times and have asked the other female bus drivers too. This must stop at once for the good of the school and the families. If they are not stopped, I will be forced to write to the school board, and I would hate to do that. To prey on another man's girl is untouchable. I suggest you find a pimple-faced whore and start up with her and leave my girls alone. So,
all right.
Basically, this letter says, one, that this person who writes it has a girlfriend.
That is a bus driver.
I also like how they say GF for girlfriend. I thought that was like something that was more...
like modern?
Modern? This is from the 70s. So maybe GF has always an abbreviation.
Mm.
So this person's saying, I have a girlfriend who's a bus driver, and apparently they were implying that Gordon had a reputation for being inappropriate with the female bus drivers.
Yeah.
And asking them to go out. And it seems like this person was implying that Gordon had a reputation for hitting on attached women.
Yeah.
So that's in one of the letters. Gordon keeps receiving these letters. And the threats are saying that if they did not stop, he didn't stop his behavior, that they would cut the brakes to his car.
Ah.
The school board also received a letter outing Massey for the affair. And the letter provided the employee number of one of the female bus drivers who he was supposedly having an affair with.
Okay.
So the employee number that was provided was 62917. And this employee number belonged to Mary Gillespie. So Mary, when she first started getting these letters, she kind of had some suspicions about who may have been behind the letters. So she thought that it was a man who worked with her and that he had previously been interested in her romantically, but she had rejected him. So this man's name was David Longberry, and he was also a school bus driver.
Okay.
So Mary and Ron decide they want to get to the bottom of the letters. And you might be thinking, okay, well, why didn't they go to the police?
Right.
So menacing letters and like stalking wasn't really a crime, like a punishable crime, until like very recently. So a lot of times, if someone was getting like threatening letters or threatening messages, unless there was a crime that actually happened, so like unless the person wrote you a threatening letter and then showed up at your house and broke into your house, they couldn't prosecute just for the letters.
Right.
Because that's not a crime. Which is
bonkers.
But like just very recently, like cyber stalking, that just very recently became a crime.
Yeah.
So in the 70s, of course, okay, they're writing letters saying that you're having an affair. It's annoying, but it's not crime. So Mary and Ron take matters into their own hands, and they decide they want to get to the bottom of it. So they decide that they're going to team up with Ron's sister and brother-in-law, Karen and Paul Freshour, to try to do some investigation on their own. So these 4 people, plus Paul's sister, were the only people who knew about the letters, or the letters they were receiving. So the group gets together and they decide that Paul is going to write a letter to David, and basically say that he knew David was writing the letters to Mary and Ron. So they send him about 4 or 5 letters, telling him to stop writing them or they will go to the police. So after that, the letters stopped for a few weeks, which made the group think that their plan had worked, that they had figured out who the letter writer was and they had successfully gotten rid of him.
Right.
So then we jump to August 19th, 1977.
Okay.
So Ron gets a phone call, and whatever happens on the phone call makes him furiously angry. At this point, they're not just getting letters, but apparently now they're getting phone calls.
So this is a phone call like from the same person who wrote the letters.
Yes, we think. So Ron gets so mad that he grabs his gun and tells his daughter that he is going to confront the person who was writing the letters. He also said that he recognized the voice on the phone, and some believe that it was the voice of David Longberry. However, that's not confirmed. Nobody knows what the person on the phone said to Ron. But whatever it was, it set him off.
Right.
A few hours later, Ron was found dead.
Oh.
He had crashed his truck into a tree and had apparently fired 1 shot from his gun. Apparently, the author of the letters had also told them that he was watching the truck that Ron drove that day. So, there was no explanation as to when or why the gun had been fired. There was also no bullet hole anywhere at the scene. And no bullet, just the shell casing.
Were his, like, brake lines cut? Because that was something that the...
So we're going to get into that.
Okay.
So remember, the author had threatened Ron multiple times.
Right.
Ron ends up dead after a car accident.
Right.
At the time of the crash, Mary and her sister-in-law were driving to Florida to escape all of the drama that they had been involved in. Before she left, Ron had apparently encouraged her to go, with the promise that he knew who the letter writer was and that he would take care of it while she was gone. So, the official police report said that Ron had died as a result of drunk driving, causing him to lose control of his car and crash into the tree. However, his family and friends said that Ron was not a drinker and that he hadn't been drinking that day. They also said that Ron would never leave his kids home alone unless it was an emergency. They believed that he had somehow been run off of the road and wondered why more attention wasn't being paid to this gunshot.
Right.
Essentially, those close to him believed it was murder.
Yeah.
So,
Like, who did he shoot the gun at? And if
exact.
there's no, like, hole or any evidence other than the casing...
Yep. So, remember, okay, so I'm going to say this, and I want you to keep this in mind. One of the people who was pushing the hardest for a full investigation was his brother-in-law, Paul Freshour. And Paul felt the local police department was not doing enough to get to the bottom of the murder or the letters.
Okay, so Paul's really pushing for this.
Paul really wants them to investigate fully.
Okay.
So after Ron passed away, other members of the town began receiving anonymous letters saying that the sheriff who had investigated Ron's death, Dwight Radcliffe, had been involved in a cover-up of Ron's death. The letters also said that Mary and Gordon Massey had been behind Ron's death. And they stated that Radcliffe had been involved in other cover-ups, notably covering up the complaints of multiple girls of inappropriate conduct against the county coroner. So, Radcliffe, the sheriff, did say that initially he thought Ron's death was the result of foul play and that another person was involved somehow. However, the identity of this person, who he said he thought was involved, was never disclosed. And Radcliffe said that the person had passed a polygraph test, which made him think that they weren't involved. So people assumed this suspect was David Longberry, but his name was never released. So let's just talk about that for a second. Because if you know anything about polygraph tests are not accurate enough, even if they are done by a trained administrator, even if all the conditions are right, they are not accurate enough to be admitted into court as evidence. And so, that's 2022 technology for polygraph tests. This is 1977 technology for polygraph tests. How accurate do we think they are?
Were polygraph tests back then used as evidence in court?
I don't think it was not used in the trial that will follow. It's not been used. It's not been accurate. Even now, they're considered 99% accurate, but they're still not used.
Right.
So for the sheriff to say, "Oh, he passed a polygraph test, so he's fine,"
I want to go back to all these letters that are coming out now. These are some serious allegations that this letter writer is if all these are coming, or all these are true, that's some significant stuff in this town that's being released if it all is true.
And there's more. There's more that's going to come out.
Okay.
So just keep yourself ready.
Okay.
So Ron's autopsy showed that his blood alcohol content was 0.16, which was 1.5 times the legal limit in Ohio. So Radcliffe concluded that it was drunk driving.
Okay.
So Ron's family asks to see the truck that he got in the accident in, because they want to look at it themselves. So they were denied. The police department said no, and that the truck had already been disposed of.
If it's ruled an accident, then why wouldn't the truck be given to them?
Right.
The only reason the truck would be held is if it was evidence in a murder case, right?
You would think so, that they had like impounded the truck and were using it as evidence. But if it's an accident, they would give the car back.
That's suspicious.
Like if in a car accident, so like if you have a car accident, my parents are both insurance agents, and so I have heard a lot about car accidents in my house. And if a person gets in a car accident, and I think if there's a fatality, they would probably like want to investigate the car before giving it back.
Right.
My sister works in auto claims, so Jacqueline, if you're listening, like tell me if I'm wrong, but
Right.
I feel like they would not dispose of the car that fast.
No.
If there was like nothing there.
Right.
Because like they say, can I look at the truck? And they're like, nope. And then they get rid of the car.
Yeah, that's...
It's not just that they keep it in lockup, they get rid of it.
That's not... That doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah. So Ron's deceased. Ron has passed away, and it's ruled as drunk driving. So after all of this, Mary came out and said that she had been having an affair with Gordon Massey. But that she didn't start the affair until she started getting letters and after Ron's death.
So she started having an affair after Ron died?
She started the relationship with Gordon after Ron died. And she says that the two of them bonded over the trauma. And that she was coming forward in the hopes that the letters would stop.
I don't believe that for a second.
Yeah, I wrote that.
You're telling me
That's in my next line, so we don't believe that, right?
You're telling me that you're getting these letters accusing you of having an affair with somebody, and then your husband tragically dies in an accident following the trauma of receiving these letters for something you didn't do, and then you go ahead and start a relationship with this person that you were accused of having an affair with right after your husband just tragically passed away? There's no way that's true. She obviously was having an affair before Ron died.
Yeah. I believe you. I'm with that.
Makes no sense.
I mean, here's the thing. Obviously, she was involved with him. Like, the whole time. Obviously.
I mean, she's admitting to it. She just is trying to make herself look better.
Okay, so I'm getting, like, menacing letters saying, if you don't stop seeing this person, I'm going to kill your kid. And then I'm like, I think I should date this guy.
Yeah, no.
I know there's only 12,000 people in Circleville.
She's trying to...
I know there's only 12,000 people. You could date anyone else in the state of Ohio.
It's like she's trying to admit to it while still covering it up.
While still maintaining her reputation.
Like, okay, fine, I'll admit it. I had an affair with this guy, but not until after my husband was dead. Mm-hmm. As if that's going to, like, save her. Like, that's... no. I don't believe that for a second.
Ron died trying to protect her reputation from this.
That's so disrespectful.
And she's like, well, we bonded over the trauma.
We bonded over the trauma of my husband's death trying to protect me. That's terrible.
Yep. So we're all in agreement here. We're all in agreement.
Yeah.
So now we jump ahead to February 1983, which is 6 years later.
Okay. So are there no letters in between?
No, there are.
There are?
There are some.
Oh.
So at this time, the town is being plagued with those signs again. The anonymous signs that are talking about Mary and...
Oh, they're still talking
Gordon
about Mary
Massey.
and Gordon.
Yes. And most of them were placed on the bus route that Mary would drive. So she's driving the kids to school and back from school, and there's these signs. So one of the signs, as I had mentioned before, accused Massey of assaulting Mary's teenage daughter or being romantically involved with her. So, this instance, she's driving the school bus, and at this time, the school bus is empty. So she sees one of these signs about her daughter. So she gets out of the bus, goes up to the sign, pulls it down, and takes it into the bus with her. So she found that there was a box attached to a piece of twine on the sign. And when she opened the box, she was almost shot. There was a booby trap with a gun inside of the box that was set to shoot whoever tried to grab the sign down.
Oh my gosh.
So she takes us to the police, and they find that the gun had a serial number that had clearly been attempted to be scrubbed off. but they were able to recover the serial number and find who it was registered to.
Uh-huh.
So when they find out who the gun was registered to, they were shocked.
Uh-huh.
So they followed the serial number to a man named Wes Wesley. He said that yes, it was his gun, but that he had recently sold the gun to his supervisor at work, who was none other than Paul Freshour, Ron's brother-in-law. And Paul had apparently just broken up with his wife, who was Ron's sister.
Huh.
So the police go to Paul. Paul confirms that yes, the gun is his, but he said that the gun had been stolen from him at some point a few weeks earlier, but he had never reported it stolen, so they couldn't confirm it. So they call him in for questioning, and they have him copy one of the letters that had been sent out so they could compare the handwriting. Paul agreed to this, and they told him that the gun had somehow been linked to the Circleville Letters. So Paul stated that he agreed to this test because he knew that he wasn't guilty and felt that the evidence and his cooperation would clear him.
Mm-hmm.
Paul was very cooperative in the investigation from the very beginning. So he said that the detectives gave him the letters and told him to copy the letters as closely as possible.
That's not how they do handwriting samples.
No, not at all. No. So experts say that this is not the way that you test for a handwriting match. And
because even if he is guilty,
yeah,
like, try and copy this as much as possible. Like, okay, perfect. So I know exactly how not to write. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they give him the letters and say, make this look as close as you can. Yeah. So the way that you do a handwriting test, in case you don't know, is that you have them write something separately.
Yeah.
And then you compare.
Yeah.
You don't just say, here's what we're looking at. Now write this exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like handwriting tests, that definitely doesn't seem like the best way to try and catch people.
Yeah. So this is the same police department, though, that ruled Ron's death, drunk driving.
Yeah.
Okay. So Paul's employment file showed that he had been absent from work on the same day that Mary found the booby trap sign. The problem was that it didn't seem like Paul had a motive to want to torment or try to kill his family members. So, Paul was arrested and put on trial in 1983 for the attempted murder of his former sister-in-law, Mary, and at the trial they had a handwriting expert come in who said that he believed Paul wrote the letters. So they actually had two handwriting experts come in, one for the defense and one for the prosecution. The one for the defense actually switched to testifying for the prosecution before the end of the trial.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. So at this point, Paul and his wife were divorced. And both his ex-wife and Mary thought that he was guilty.
Uh-huh.
Paul insisted that he was being framed. So he was never accused or convicted of writing the letters, but the idea that he wrote the letters played largely into the trial against him.
Okay.
So during the trial, Paul never took the stand in his own defense, which he regretted later. And at the end of the trial, Paul was found guilty of the attempted murder of Mary and was also believed to have been the writer of the letters. And he was sentenced to 7 to 25 years in prison, which was the maximum sentence for attempted murder. The trial lasted just 1 week, and jury deliberation was 2.5 hours.
That's pretty quick.
Yes. So with his sentencing, the case was officially closed. Paul, however, says that there is a lot of evidence that was left out of the trial and not presented to the jury. Specifically, the testimony of another school bus driver that worked with Mary.
Okay.
So the first piece of evidence that he says was left out was that there were no fingerprints found on the booby trap, and there was no real evidence found within the box that contained the booby trap. He also says the case was largely based on circumstantial evidence, and no one had seen Paul near the booby trap. So yes, Paul was out of work that day. However, he had an alibi. He took the day off of work to have some stuff done in his house, and many people said that they saw him out at the house at the time the booby trap was set up, or would have been set up. So the bus driver that I mentioned, she also drove the same route that Mary would have the day that she tore down the sign and found the booby trap. However, this bus driver drove about 20 minutes prior to Mary.
Okay.
So she said that when she was driving by that spot, she saw a yellow El Camino parked there, and that there was a large man with sandy-colored hair. So this man saw her drive by, and when he did, he turned around and pretended that he was going to the bathroom and preventing her from seeing his face. The description of this man did not match Paul Freshour's appearance. So he was a large man with sandy-colored hair. Paul was shorter and had dark hair.
Okay.
So this lead was never pursued by the police of this man in the yellow El Camino. So Paul is in jail, and the case is closed.
Sweet.
Okay, well, we'll see you next week. Just kidding. That's not where we end. So Paul is in prison, but the letters don't stop coming, with some of the letters even being delivered to Paul himself. So people still thought for a hot minute that he was sending the letters, but some of the letters were sent when he was in solitary confinement and wouldn't have been able to send any letters.
Okay.
The letters were also still postmarked from Columbus, Ohio, while Paul was in prison in Lima, Ohio, over 200 miles away. So right before he was up for parole after 7 years in prison, so many letters had been sent that when he went before the parole board, they denied him parole because of the letters, saying that this was evidence he had not been rehabilitated and was not ready to go back into the general population. This was despite testimony from the prison warden saying that he was a model prisoner and that he couldn't have written the letters. And the warden testified that all of his incoming and outgoing mail was searched and reviewed by prison employees. So one of the letters that Paul received said, "Now, when are you going to believe that you aren't going to get out of there? I told you 2 years ago. When we set them up, they stay set up. Don't you listen at all?" And that letter came after he was denied parole.
Dang.
One of the letters also attacked the prosecutor in Paul's trial, saying that he had impregnated a school teacher and then later murdered her. The author threatened to dig up the woman's bones and send them to the police if they didn't investigate this further. So that turned out to be kind of true. So the prosecutor did have a relationship with a woman who was pregnant when she died, and she was pregnant with his child.
Dang. But he didn't murder her?
Yes. I don't know if he murdered her or not. Some of the other things that the letter writer said. They claimed that the man who performed Ron Gillespie's autopsy was a pedophile. And this was the coroner that the author had said that Sheriff Radcliffe was covering for.
Right.
A few years later, the coroner was convicted and sent to prison for crimes that confirmed that he was, and that there had likely been some sort of a cover-up.
So the letter writer is like pretty accurate.
Yes.
It makes you wonder, like, how do they know all this information, and why did it start with Mary and Gordon?
Yeah. So the letter writer, there were other things, I kept looking for more examples, but those were not the only things that the letter writer said that came out to be true. A lot of the things that they said were true.
Interesting. So they were well informed.
They're very well informed. And they have this, knowledge.
Like this inside stuff.
Very intimate knowledge,
people are, really trying to keep secret.
Yeah. And this, led this, to the idea that this writer has this, almost, omniscience. They know everything. So, 1993, Paul is released from prison after 10 years in prison. And in 1994, an episode of Unsolved Mysteries comes out about the letters. So after the episode aired, the production company behind Unsolved Mysteries got their own letter from the writer, saying, "Forget Circleville, Ohio. Do nothing to hurt Sheriff Radcliffe. If you come to Ohio, you El Sickos will pay." The Circleville writer. So that was the last letter that was sent associated with the Circleville letters.
Interesting.
To unsolve.
So now
mysteries.
they're trying to protect the writer is trying to protect the sheriff.
Yes.
Wasn't he attacking him earlier?
The writer is trying to protect themselves. It sounds like. Don't come to Ohio. Don't try and figure out who we are. You'll pay if you come to Ohio.
Interesting.
So, we have Unsolved Mysteries comes out, and that's the last of the letters. So now we get to the theories. Who are some of the people that are believed to be behind the letters? So the first one is Paul Freshour.
Right.
So he was believed to be the letter writer by many people. And he, however, held to his innocence until he passed in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So he said that he was innocent of the murder, of the letters, and that he had been framed. And the thing is, he doesn't really seem to have a motive. Also, how would he have had the means to continue to send the letters while he was in prison?
Right.
So one finding that actually came about while he was in prison was that his fingerprints were found on dozens of letters that were sent while he was in prison.
How is that possible?
That's what I'm thinking. So the question is, how did his fingerprints come to be on the letters? If all of his mail is being checked before it comes in and goes out, they would have noticed if he's writing these like anonymous, menacing letters. One theory that I saw presented about this was that he may have mass wrote the letters before he went to jail and then had someone else mail them.
Right, he could have had an accomplice. Whoever that guy was that the other bus driver saw.
Yeah, in El Camino. The thing is, as we know, the more people that get involved, the harder it is to keep it a secret. One theory in regards to a possible motive is that he was trying to help his wife, Karen, end the affair that Mary was having.
Mm-hmm.
Karen was Ron's sister.
Right, but then why would it continue after that all ended?
Right.
And why would they start threatening all these other people?
And why would Karen and Paul kill Ron?
And why would they do it that way? Why wouldn't they just talk to Ron directly?
I don't know. So Karen also said that Paul despised Mary because of her affair with Gordon Massey.
Yeah.
So in 2021, the show 48 Hours had 2 FBI experts come on to discuss the evidence. One expert said that Paul definitely wrote the letters. One said that he definitely did not.
Okay, so those are the opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yes. I think the thing that we're realizing through this episode is that handwriting is really...
It's tough to
nail, and it's also like
how
not a very accurate... You can't really use it in like convicting someone.
How sure are people that the same person wrote all these letters?
So one of the people that they had an FBI profiler come on, and she was like, I am convinced that it's the same person.
Okay.
Some people think that maybe they're more than one letter writer.
Yeah, because I could believe Paul being involved early on, but once he goes to prison, that does kind of make things put into question, unless he kind of had an idea that he might be going to prison, and so he's trying to prove his innocence by that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the question is, so he says he's framed. The question is, if he was framed, why would he have been framed, and who would have done it?
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it's interesting that Paul was one of the people that was pushing for Ron's death to be investigated.
Right.
While the police department was okay to say that it was drunk driving. So Paul was ultimately the one who was accused of being kind of the cause. And he was the one who from the beginning was like, you need to do a better job investigating.
Right.
So to me...
Well, that would feed into the theory of Mary and Gordon being the ones who set up, like that got Ron killed.
Yeah.
And he's like, if he's the letter writer from the beginning, he knows this and he says, you need to investigate this because I know these people that I've been threatening, I know that they're going to. But also it's like, if Paul's goal is to try to expose the affair, why is he threatening Ron? Like, it just feels like...
Because this whole thing is he wants to protect Ron.
Right.
So why is he threatening Ron? And why is he threatening... I mean, those are his nieces.
It's a completely unnecessary way to go about things. Like, if you know about this affair, if you know about all these things, then you should just go directly to them. Yeah. And be like, I know this is happening. This is how I know.
Right. And, like, that's his family.
Right.
So the author of the letter also wrote that they wanted Ron's death to be investigated more fully, and that the sheriff was involved in some sort of a cover-up. So that kind of either points to maybe Paul was like writing the letters and there was someone else on the phone who set up Ron's death.
Right.
But again, it's all just like kind of a mystery. Another theory as to the person behind the letters is Mary herself. So people thought that maybe she had to be in on it a little bit. So they also questioned how she would know which sign to take down that had the booby trap without getting shot.
Right.
So it was rigged to shoot whoever took it down. She didn't get shot.
It's true.
The gun didn't even go off. Some people also believe that she may have wanted her husband dead so she could carry on with the affair. The thing is, I don't think that those two things necessarily are
She just
the same.
drew attention to herself, if
Exactly.
that's the case.
So if she wanted to just get rid of Ron, she didn't have to send all those letters to herself. She didn't have to put up those signs and embarrass herself. She didn't have to put up those signs about her children. It seems like if she wanted to just have the affair, she could have just had the affair.
She could have.
She was just having the affair.
If she wanted Ron,
why would she bring all this attention to herself?
Wait, if she wanted Ron out of the way, she could have done it in a way that didn't draw attention to herself.
Right.
Like if she's involved this whole time, and is involved in Ron's death ultimately, she could have just done what she did to kill Ron in the first place, and not done any of this stuff with the letters, and there's a lot less attention on her.
Yeah.
If that's the case, it just doesn't seem to make sense.
Exactly. So another person, David Longberry.
Right.
So he was the bus driver that Mary initially thought was behind the letters. So not only was he romantically jilted by her, which we know some men have very fragile egos and don't take rejection from women too well.
Right.
But he was also not a good person.
Oh.
So in 1999, while he was wanted and on the run from the law for the rape of a teenager, he died by suicide. Now, the letters stopped around the time he went on the run.
But then yeah.
So that's another theory. Mary thought it was him at first. So
But again, why would he be calling out all this other stuff, all this other injustice? The writer of the letters...
it seems like they are kind of... They see themselves almost as like a vigilante.
Right. Even though they're threatening people, threatening to murder people, even though they're doing all that stuff, they do seem to be like pushing for justice. And so somebody like that doesn't really seem to fit the mold of the person it would be.
Right. He's running from the law. He doesn't care about this kind of stuff.
Nova joining us for the last little bit.
I mean.
Okay, keep going.
Okay, so another theory is that it was Karen Freshour, Paul's wife.
Okay.
So one of the biggest theories kind of talks about whether or not Paul was framed for the letters and attempted murder, and that it may have been his ex-wife who was behind the framing. So her and Paul were divorced, but they did not have an amicable divorce. In the divorce papers, there were allegations that there was physical violence against her, but regardless, the divorce ended in Paul getting custody of the couple's children and most of the couple's assets.
Oh, wow.
So we know this is very rare. And it's kind of also concerning because in divorces, most of the time, they favor the wife in regards to assets and child custody.
Right.
At least in child custody. Usually you would see like alimony and like that kind of thing. But for the husband to get full custody of the children, that's very rare.
Yeah.
So after this, she lost her home and ended up living in a trailer on Mary's property. So an investigator said that he had never seen someone hate someone else as much as Karen did Paul.
Oof.
So people think that she could have framed him as she had access to his gun. Okay, so stay with me as I go through this train of thought. Paul and Karen had 3 children, 2 daughters and 1 son. In the process of the divorce, the son basically took his mother's side and cut off his father, never going to visit him in prison. So apparently she let the daughters have a relationship with their dad, but for the son, it was either you're his son or my son.
Interesting.
So yeah, they had, on the 48 Hours episode, they had Paul's niece who talked about this. Like, the daughters can have a relationship with the dad, but the mom's like, you're either his son or you're my son. You got to pick a side.
That's weird.
I know. So the son picks her side. So Paul apparently believed that his son was the person who stole his gun. But that he would never have reported his son for the crime, as he would rather go to prison than report his son. So, people think either it was Karen or their son, Mark, who could have stolen the gun.
And then set him up.
So, Mark passed away by suicide, I think, in his 20s. So, Karen testified, saying that she had found letters in her home that Paul had apparently written that were addressed to Mary. But when she was asked to produce the letters, she said that she had thrown them away.
Yeah, right.
At one point, Karen apparently asked Paul's sister for a typewriter, and shortly after that, the letters started being written on a typewriter.
So, they were originally handwritten, and then at one point they start being written on a typewriter.
Yes.
And we know that around the same time, Karen
allegedly
had access to a typewriter.
Allegedly. Yes.
Okay.
So also, if Paul was in prison, everything he had gotten in the divorce would go back to her.
Okay.
Also, the man the other bus driver saw with the yellow El Camino. At the time of the sighting, Karen was apparently dating a man who fit that description, tall with sandy brown hair. Her boyfriend did not have a yellow El Camino, but her brother did.
Huh.
And also, according to Paul's niece, Karen was very unhappy that Unsolved Mysteries was in town and that they were investigating the letters, and that she reached out to family members who were planning on being interviewed, telling them that it would be in their best interest not to participate. The problem is, she could have killed her sister-in-law in the process of trying to frame her ex-husband.
Right, but would she care if she was cheating on her
Exactly.
brother?
Exactly. Yeah, Mary cheated on Karen's brother, and...
So maybe she was trying to kill Mary. And set up Paul at the same time.
If someone cheated on my sister, I probably wouldn't care what happened to them.
Yeah.
I wouldn't try and kill them, maybe. But anyways, so Karen may or may not have known Mary's employee ID number at work.
What?
Remember how the letter to the school board?
Oh.
Yeah. So Karen was never considered a person of interest or a suspect to the police department, but the letter writer did imply that the police department was probably not very trustworthy.
Yeah, so when it comes down to all of the theories, like, I can see why Paul maybe is involved. I can see why David is maybe involved. I can see why Karen is maybe involved. I can even see why Mary is maybe involved. I wonder why, though, what the motive for any of them is to continue writing the letters about the other injustice that isn't involved with their family. Right? Like, because they talk about, like, the coroner and the sheriff and, like, all this other stuff.
So, like,
that's going on.
why would they care?
Like, right. Why are all these, like, unless that's to try and, like, take the heat off them, but and then it all just feels very complicated way to deal with these, like, family dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
And I could believe, now, maybe there's an original writer.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's Paul, maybe it's not. And maybe when the letters switch to being written on a typewriter,
it was...
Then, and how can you can't you don't know if it's the same person writing if it's written on a typewriter.
Yeah.
There's no way of knowing.
They were mostly written by hand.
Oh.
Primarily written by hand. So that was another theory I was going to mention, was that it could have been a lot of other different people.
Right.
So, like, it could have started with one person or even a small team of people who were working together. But then other people in the town who knew things about the town saw this as a way to expose some of the injustices that were going on.
Because that's the other thing about, like, all the people we've mentioned so far is, like, how would they know? How are they knowing all this stuff? Like, how do they know these, like, deep, deep secrets? Like, obviously knowing the secrets about your family, sure, that's one thing. But knowing, like, that the sheriff covered up for the coroner who had inappropriate, like, relationships and abused, like, teenage girls, like, how do you know that?
Yeah.
So, like, it being multiple people is something that makes a lot more sense to me, because, like, how is one person getting all this information, especially if it's any of the people we've discussed so far?
Yeah.
Maybe it's some other person who just is involved, but then it's like, well, why did they start in the first place? Why were they so concerned with Gordon and what's her face? I forgot her name.
Mary.
Gordon and Mary.
So I had one other person on here, but I think he almost kind of fits into the other theory about, like, a lot of other people, and that was Gordon Massey's son, William. Oh. Maybe he knew about the affair and wanted to stop it. And some of the letters were signed with a W, which make people think it could have been William.
Yeah.
But again, there's not a lot of information on that one. And so I think the main thing here is that nobody knows, like, still to this day, nobody knows who is behind the letters. Nobody knows what really happened to Ron. And nobody has ever been, like, I guess, charged with writing the letters. Except for Paul has been, I guess, accused in the court of public opinion.
Right.
And as of now, the case is closed. So, Ethan, as we conclude, who do you think was behind the letters? And why?
Yeah, I don't really know. Because I can see, like I said earlier, I can see the case for it being a couple of these different people, but not fully. So, if it is just one person, then I don't know if I believe it is any of these people we've talked about. You know, save for maybe William, because we just don't know much about him. But I think, you know, if it is possible that it was multiple people, it makes more sense that it was multiple people. You know, maybe it started off as this little feud within this family, but then, you know, people took this opportunity to start spreading awareness about these different injustices, or to try and take, you know, it does appear that the police department was fairly corrupt, so maybe people were trying to take things into their own hands and, you know, use this opportunity to do that, but it's really tough to tell. So I don't know. I think maybe it could have been Paul and Karen at the beginning, and then maybe Karen did set up Paul and potentially tried to kill Mary in the process, but then maybe it kind of went from there and took off into its own thing.
Yeah. I think that Karen did frame Paul.
Yeah.
But I don't think she was the only one who wrote the letters. I think that Karen hates Paul. Like, she hated him. So I think that if it were all her, then it would have been a lot more focused on him instead of, like, Mary. Or instead of all these other things.
Well, in the beginning, they were still married, so you would assume that she didn't hate him as much then.
You would hope not.
Yeah, like, maybe the hatred didn't start. It's like, maybe Paul and Karen were in it together from the beginning. And then, you know, they split up, and all this stuff happens after Ron's death. And Karen's like, you know what, I'm going to use this. Because there was, like, a little break, right, in between when letters were sent. So, like, maybe Karen's like, you know what? I'm going to use this tactic, and I'm going to try and frame Paul, because I know that this is something that kind of worked in the past a little bit or something. You know, I don't know.
Yeah. I think it was more than one person. I think, like, for one person to know this much about what's going on in the town, it's possible, certainly. But I think that it seems like there's probably more going on. I do think that, like, it started off with someone who had something against Mary and against the family and was willing to kind of throw their children under the bus to get what they wanted. Yeah. But I do think that it gave other people who saw that there was, like, some real stuff going on in the town the opportunity to anonymously speak about it and bring some of it to light. I mean, whether or not, like, anything came of it, like with the sheriff and Ron's death, I mean, awareness is always important.
Right.
But I think that it's a question of, like, could it really have been one person?
Yeah.
And if so, like, will we ever get to the bottom of it? Probably not.
Probably not.
As usual, we want to know what you guys think about this. Do you think that there was one person behind the letters? Do you think there was multiple people? And if there was just one person, who do you think it was? And do you think Paul was framed for the attempted murder of Mary? And if so, by who or why? And if not, then, why not? And of course, we'd also appreciate it if you would leave us a nice 5-star review on your streaming platform of choice. Like this video if you're watching it on YouTube. Leave us a comment about what you think may have happened. And share us with your friends or family. And, grow the family in that way. And let us know if you have any cases you'd like us to cover. I always love hearing what you guys are interested in. And we will be back in 1 week. Bye.
Bye.